Greetings, I'm Joe. This is Hexed Encountered, and in this episode we're going to be doing a first look at the game Paths to Hell. This is Warstorm series. This is the entry on Operation Barbarossa, June through December of 1941. This was published by Compass Games, designed by Juan Cebrián and Nicolás Eskubi. This is going to be part of my Platoon-level tactical series, which so far, this is the third one I'm doing. I've already done the Panzer Grenadier series with the entry Fire in the Steppe, which also covered Operation Barbarossa. And I followed that up with the Nations at War series and its entry Stalin's Triumph, which covers the Battle of Kursk. So you might sense a pattern here. We are definitely dealing with the Eastern Front of World War II. So I've chosen two games that cover Operation Barbarossa, that being the aforementioned Fire in the Steppe and this one, Paths to Hell. And I also have two for Battle of Kursk, which would be the, again, aforementioned Nations at War Stalin's Triumph game. And the fourth game in this video series will be on Platoon Commander Deluxe, the Battle of Kursk. And there's a possibility we may do a fifth and sixth entry. Both of those would deal with the Großdeutschland division. And that would be GD41 from Multi-Man Publishing / The Gamers, and also Fighting Formations Großdeutschland Division from GMT Games. So let's take a look at the back of the box here, since Paths to Hell is in the spotlight at the moment. So this is the Warstorm series, as I mentioned. There are several games in this series. It started, I believe, with games about the Spanish Civil War. There is a Battle of France entry from 1940. There is a Normandy entry. There is an upcoming Desert, North Africa module. And also Help Arrives, which is a second Spanish Civil War, kind of a sequel to A las Barricadas. So to get back to the matter at hand, which is Paths to Hell, this one obviously is Compass Games. It does deal with the Eastern Front. And it recreates the events of those days being the early days of the war, the invasion that began on June 22nd, 1941 by the Germans. This game recreates the events of those days and allows the players to reproduce the most famous battles of Operation Barbarossa on the Eastern Front. At a tactical level, players take command of either the Soviet or Axis forces or can play solitaire in the tactical battles of each scenario. Paths to Hell has a moderate complexity with good solitaire suitability. That's true. This fits in pretty well with the other games I've done so far. I would say it's more similar to Panzer Grenadier than it is to Nations at War, but there are, obviously, when you're dealing with a platoon-level tactical system, there's going to be similarities. I would say this one is similar in some ways to elements of both the previous two I've done. Probably a little bit more in common with Panzer Grenadier, although it does have its own differences, and I'll talk about that once we get into the playthroughs and so on. So in the game, we get 4 isomorphic maps, 8 overlays, 5 sheets of counters, 1 standard rulebook, 1 exclusive rulebook, so like some of the other games in the series. In fact, both of the other games in the series fall into this same category. There is a series rulebook and a rulebook exclusive to this particular entry in the series. We get 7 scenario cards with 13 scenarios, 3 charts and table cards, 2 battalion charts cards, and 2 6-sided dice. The complexity here is pretty much pegged right in the middle. That's, I think, fair. And the solitaire rating is also pegged in the middle. I think that's also somewhat fair. This is very much a soloable system. There is also from Draco, they have a Alone in the Storm entry, which is a solitaire system designed for the Warstorm series, much like the Nations at War series has a solitaire solo assistant, I believe is what Lock and Load calls it. Panzer Grenadier, on the other hand, does not have a solitaire module, but it is pretty solitaire friendly. So let's open up the box here. So right at the top, we've got our 2 dice, one red, 1 gray, which are appropriate, of course, for the 2 forces, gray Germans, red Soviets. So these are the overlays, and these are just basically hexes that you would cut out. They're not punched. This is just cardstock, and you have to cut it out, which isn't ideal. My scissor skills might leave something to be desired. But yeah, you cut these out, and they give you the ability to, obviously this is a 2-level hill, give you the ability to vary your terrain on the included maps, of which there are 4. So we have our terrain overlay, and then we have our maps. So I've been saving the maps typically for last, so I'm going to do that again. We'll just put these aside for the moment and then take a look at the end. Then we have our battalion morale chart. Okay, so this is platoon level. The platoons can be organized into companies, which can also then be organized into battalions, as you might expect. And then you have things that impact the morale. So you can have the death of a battalion officer would knock your morale down by 2. Death of a company officer by 1. If you lose a company, that's 2, etc. There are things that will also give you bonuses, such as rallying a routed company, winning an assault, taking an objective, beginning of a new day as given by scenario. So there are some scenarios. So this is just one-sided. There are 2 of them, 1 for each side, as you might expect. Now we have our scenario cards. And yeah, there are a decent number of these. So here are the scenario cards. All right. So they're kind of not in order. Here's Tarnopol, which is Path to Hell scenario 1. So as you might expect, and this again is somewhat common to what we've seen in some of the other entries, you do have an order of battle for both sides. The Germans over here, the Soviets over here, and the unit that is involved. So we have elements of the 5th SS Division Viking. They enter on turn 1 on the south edge of the map. It tells you that you're using map A and overlay B. And then you get officers. Officers are very important in this system, much as they are in Panzer Grenadier. That's one of the commonalities between the 2 systems that I mentioned. We have reinforcements. The German map edge is the south. You always have to, if you're routed, you have to retreat towards your map edge. That's an important part of the system as well. Germans will be at the south end. You get your orientation over here. Soviet map edge would be the opposite one, north in this case. Scenario length, victory conditions. The Soviet player wins if he controls Tarnopol, and it gives you the hexes that indicate what that city would be. Soviet player wins just by preventing the German from winning. You've got terrain notes, the notes about the Germans and Soviet players, no special rules. So this is a special rule for the German player and a special rule for the Soviet player. There are no special rules that apply to both sides. So that's what these would indicate. And then you get the historical aftermath, where the Viking units in its baptism of fire faced the tough defense of Tarnopol. They eventually cleared the town and followed its advance toward Kiev and the Dnieper. Then on the other side, you would have second scenario, crossing the San River. Then we have scenario 3, bitter lesson. Scenario 4, towards Minsk siege. 5, Bolden's counterattack. So this is still in June. Assaulting the line, also in June. Then we go to, where's 7? Here's 7. So like I said, these got a little bit out of order. Near Smolensk in July. Bialystok also in July. Then 9 is this guy right here. Balta's capture in August. 10 is Kiev assault. And you can see they get bigger. This one is 4 maps. A decent order of battle on both sides. Then this is part of the Kiev assault. It's just because this is such a big scenario that it's actually 2 pages. And on the back of it, you have scenario 11, which is the supply convoy, and this is in September. So this one actually has partisans in it, which is an interesting twist. And then 12, Barbarossa, back in July. And again, just 1st 93 Infantry Regiment, and elements of several survivor formations. So this was obviously in the very mobile part of Barbarossa, when the Soviets were basically reeling. And then you have the knocking on the Kremlin's door. So this is the last scenario, and this takes place, as you might guess, December of 41, and the end of Barbarossa, the failure by the Germans to actually successfully capture Moscow before winter set in. So you have a good variety of scenarios there. Now we have some charts, and there are a lot of charts, as you might expect. So we have odds charts for calculating the odds for a combat. You have defensive values for the various terrain types, movement chart for the various terrain types, off-board artillery, air location, spotting chart. Here's our combat chart. So here's our CRT with the fire factor and your die rolls, all the modifiers. Hand-to-hand for assault combat, and a bunch of modifiers and so on. There are 2 of those. So these 2, this is the second copy of that. Then we have armored assault charts, and there are 2 of these as well. So I'm just going to put this one over here. So you have German, and this is divided out by the various fighting vehicles. So you have everything from your Panzer IIs all the way through. You have Panzer IIIs and 4s, the Flampanzer, the various armored cars, the Stug, all that stuff is in here. We even have a Panzerjäger 1 in here. Soviets, you get everything from your T-26 through the T-35, obviously the T-34, the KVs, etc. I don't actually see the T-70 on here. Anyway, not a big deal. Aerial attack charts for various aircraft, various models of the Me-109, 2 of those, the Me-110, the Heinkel 111, the Junkers 88, and of course the famous Stuka. And over here we have the Soviet units, the I-16, the Polikarpov U-2, the PE-2, the IL-2. That would be the Sturmovik, which is pretty nice, actually. And on the other side, we have penetration charts. So the combat for the tanks is a little bit more in-depth than some of the other systems we've seen so far. And so when you learn this game, they have like the basic rules, which essentially is infantry combat, and then they add the layer on for armor and air and all that stuff after that. Because this is a little bit more complicated. You do have the range, which will help determine the penetration when you have these various guns that are firing. So we have a German one and a Soviet one, as you might expect. Here's our terrain effect chart. So you do get a graphical image of what the hexes or the terrain on the hexes looks like on the maps, which I find very useful because I've been in situations in some other games where I'm like, I don't know if this is light woods or heavy woods or whatever, etc. This gives you everything that you need. You've got your movement for the 3 types. And on the counters, we'll see in a bit, these colors actually track with the firepower values for the various units. Actually, not firepower. The movement rating is colored in these colors. Then you have your defensive values rather, which is a divisor. So when you have combat, you get a result and then you divide it by these values to get your final result. So the combat is one of the things that's unique about this system, at least so far, that we've seen. As I mentioned, there are similarities with the other games, but there are also unique elements because every system is different. And again, the whole purpose of this particular video series is to kind of lay this stuff out for you guys so you can make a determination on how you might view playing this series. Does it block line of sight? And the terrain height. You'll notice that things like rough have a terrain height of 0.5. Marsh 0.5, fields 0.5. In some other games, that would be called degrading terrain. So if you have, in this case, if you have 3 rough hexes in a row or 3 of these 0.5 terrain heights in a row, that's going to block line of sight. That's why it says yes, no, because it is possible for it to block line of sight. If line of sight passes through 3 or more rough or field hexes or a combination of these, it is blocked. So pretty straightforward. And it actually has enough that it goes onto the back of the sheet. we come to our exclusive rules. So we'll skip that for the moment and go to our standard rules. So this is actually version 1 in here. The rules for the series are actually up to version 2.1. They are available online. I have them in a digital format, and I'm going to use 2.1. At least I think 2.1 is the current version. That was the version that was released with Normandy, which I believe is the most, actually Help Arrives is the newest game, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, we do have 2.1, which supersedes these, but there isn't a ton of changes. So, and this is very well illustrated. There is a lot of examples in here. Like this here is all combat stuff. And then here we have officers. Again, officers are very important in this system. Similarly to Panzer Grenadier, where you have to have units, and this is true also for Nations at War, although it's more abstracted to headquarters. Your units need to be in command, basically, to be fully capable. It is possible for out-of-command units to do things, but they don't get any bonuses, and they're a little bit more limited in what they can do across these various games. All of these have that kind of element in it. In Panzer Grenadier and Paths to Hell, there are specific leaders that your units have to be in range of to actually benefit from being activated and also being able to, what they can do. Like in Panzer Grenadier, you have to be stacked with the leader or be in one of the hexes adjacent to the leader's hex. In this one, they have a command range, which is similar more to Nations at War, where the HQs have a command range. And as long as you're in the command range, you can be activated by your leader in the Warstorm series. So, as I've said, the rules are pretty extensive, and the current rule book goes out to about 50 pages, which is way more than this. But it's all very, very well laid out, and at least in 2.1, I actually haven't read the version 1 rules. I've heard that these weren't written all that well, but if you get the current rule set, it's better. It's a little bit more clarified. As time goes on, I think Panzer Grenadiers on version 4 of their rules. So as time goes on, the system continues to get refined. The rules get better and better and better, and so on. So the rules, as I said, if you can get the most recent rules, they're all backwards compatible. So I would use the most recent rules with whatever game you're playing. We have our exclusive rules here for this one, which is just a handful of pages, 7 pages. And mostly dealing with like setup and purchasing forces. That's the last like 3 pages. So 4 pages really, because you're designing a point-based scenario, starts on page 4. Here you have a kind of an updated movement cost. Updated movement cost for your terrain. That was a little bit out of shot. I apologize. Commissars are something that's new here because they didn't have commissars in some of the other situations, West Front situations rather. Tachankas, which was just a horse-drawn machine gun platform on the Soviet side. So you can see there's not a ton. Human wave attacks, Nebelwerfers and Katyushas, gullies, mud for the Rasputitsa, and snow, etc., etc. So the exclusive rules, very short, but useful, of course. Now let's look at our counters. So here are these would be the German counters, as you would probably guess by the color. And you can see they've got images on them as opposed to NATO symbology. There are a lot of numbers on some of these. The infantry is a little bit more, there aren't really any basic infantry on here. These are machine guns, so they're support weapons. But you can see the color of the firepower. Yellow indicates that this is basically anti-personnel, HE. That's the firepower, and the 3 would be the range in hexes. And on a tank over here, and you can also see on the gun as well, you have different values as well. You also have this white, so that's the anti-tank. So you have a firepower of 6 and a range of 4 for that. The other numbers would be for things like assault. You have your movement factor down here, the color of the movement rating. So this Panzer 38 has an 11. That means it has 11 movement points, and it's tracked. Foot will have a white color, that's 4. And here down at the bottom you have yellow, 21, for our 222. This one is wheeled. So you have tracked, wheeled, and foot. And there are 2 sides. You have a full side and a reduced side. They actually take, if they're 3 steps, they take 1. You put a -1 on the top. And there are some penalties for combat with being reduced by 1 step. When you go down to, you start at 3, you get a counter, there's a marker, -1 that you put on it when it gets reduced the first time. Second time it gets flipped to its other side. Third time would eliminate it. So those were the Germans. Here are some Soviets. So same kind of thing, same rating. You get the little flag in the corner. You get also the letters indicate the formation that they're in. So let's look at infantry. So here we have infantry. All right, so you see the leaders, Lieutenant Lashkov here. They have a leadership rating. They have a morale rating. They also will tell you what unit they go with. So if we find some infantry, so these are infantries, and you can see they have an L. So they would be Company L. That's how that works. So you have Company A, Company B, Company C, etc. And each of those will have their own commanders. So we have Captain Lukyanov, he's attached to B. You have Sergeant Ivanikov, which is attached to C. Lieutenant Pyatnikov to D, etc., etc. You have a whole bunch. You also have these guys here with the blue. These are armored leaders. So yeah, there's a bunch of different things. We have some commissars as well, as you might expect. And you can see on the back here, you have different things: NKVD, partisans, cavalry, motorized, engineer, etc. So then we have our German counters. Same kind of thing. Start with Company A, Company B. They all have leaders. There are replacement leaders because your leaders can be killed and then they would be replaced. And so you can see that. We even have some Romanians down here as well. And you have SS too, as you might expect, that you might have SS, with it being the Germans. They're in black. And they have the little death head symbol up there in the upper left corner. And here are some of the markers. And so here you see the -1. This is the step reduction marker that you would put on there. When a unit takes an action, they would get a finished marker instead of like ops complete that you might see in some other games. Here are out of command markers. You can mark units for reaction, which is basically opportunity fire. So any unit can do what some other games would call opportunity fire. In this game, it's just called reaction. But if you pre-mark them reaction, they can fire basically in reaction with their full firepower. If you do not, and it's kind of an on-the-fly thing, they get half their firepower. And then after they do that, they would get marked as finished. And then you have other things for marking terrain: fortification, trenches, improved positions, minefields, rubble, anti-tank ditch, dragon's teeth, pontoon bridge, etc. You have also 2-step reductions because some units that are, say, towed, they don't have a reduced side. So they just would get a 1, a -1, then a -2, and then be eliminated. Because sometimes they're going to be flipped over to their towed side, and they don't have a reduced side. So that's what that is for. You also have discipline failure. So commissars may try to rally their routed troops, and if they fail, they may get a discipline failure, and actually that can result in some platoons actually being eliminated. So there's a lot of good kind of chunky nuance in this game. And it really depends on, again, it's whether you like this is going to depend on your own personal preferences. What I'm going to do is try through my playthrough to kind of show you what the game has to offer, and then you guys make the call on whether you like it or not. So I'm just putting all this back, and then I am going to show you the maps. So this is map C. Now, it's going to typically be oriented in this direction, although they are anamorphic, so they can go in whatever direction you need. We've got dry river, we've got major river, we've got a town. we've got fields, you've got elevation lines here, crest lines. All of these are accounted for in the rules as far as line of sight and things like that. We've got a rail line going right up the middle. You've got a road here and a bridge, etc. We have some lake down here. So there, and this is kind of light urban. I forget what it's called, but it's dispersed buildings or something like that, I think is what they call this stuff out here. So that's map C. Let's see if we can find map A. Yeah, here's map A. So this is map A, which is more rural, countryside-y. Lots of fields, some elevation. We got a 2-level hill here. Got a small kind of rural town. A couple of those hexes here. We got road, again, a dry riverbed. So that's map A. They're all single-sided. There are only 4 of them, but they do give you those terrain overlays to kind of give you a little bit extra variety. Here's B. Again, these are basically roughly similar to something like I would think that I might see in something like Last 100 Yards. Has maps kind of similar to this, except they're more cardstock. This is paper. So they're a little thin, and you'll probably want to put them under some plexi or something to kind of flatten them out and protect them instead of like folding them back like you might do with, say, a mounted board. If you gently fold it back a little bit, it'll lay flat. You don't want to do that with these probably if you're going to play it a lot because you'll end up tearing it. But yeah, so again, this is map B. Lots of fields, some road, no water features on this particular map. So you do have some variety here. So here we have map D. So this is the last one. Big field. We do have a minor river with some rapids. That's a ford, I believe, right here, maybe. So not really rapids, more of a ford. So you have a ford here and a ford here. There are rules for crossing rivers. Major rivers you typically cannot cross without like a pontoon bridge or at a real bridge. The minor rivers, there are rules for crossing them. Dry riverbeds, obviously, you can cross. We have a couple of small hills in here. We have a little pond. So, and then lots of woods and light woods. So these are light woods, these are woods. And you can kind of see that there's a good variety. Most of the terrain that you would expect to see in Russia and the Ukraine and Belarus and all that stuff is going to be in here. So that, whoops, I dropped my dice. So that is Paths to Hell. Again, this is Warstorm series, as you can see right here. This was published by Compass Games, designed by Juan Cebrián and Nicolás Eskubi, and I hope I didn't butcher your names, guys. But that does it. So this is my first look at this game. There will be a playthrough video coming up in the next week or so to kind of highlight gameplay and go through and show you how this game plays, just like we did for Nations at War and Panzer Grenadier. And then following that, of course, will be Platoon Commander Deluxe Battle of Kursk from Flying Pig Games. And then we'll see where we're at, and potentially we might look at something from MMP and GMT as well. So that's going to do it. As always, thank you for watching. If you'd like to leave a comment, have questions, whatever, please feel free to do so. I will reply as soon as I can. And if you would, please consider liking, sharing, and or subscribing. I always appreciate the support you guys give my channel, help it grow. That is awesome and much, much appreciated. But that will do it. My name's Joe. This has been Hexed Encountered. And until next time, happy gaming.